Celebrations to mark the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China have just ended here in Beijing. It's a key milestone for the party, but also for the country with which it's inextricably linked. Ahead of the celebrations, Chinese President Xi Jinping called on officials to create a more respectable, lovable, and credible image for China. Could this mark a shift in China's diplomatic strategy and how it handles its relationship with key powers around the world? Welcome to this special talk show edition of CNA Correspondent. We are here at the Shangri-La China World Summit Wing Hotel, right in the heart of Beijing's bustling central business district. And here I am joined by Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, as well as Andy Mock, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And we're here to dive deep and discuss the future of the Communist Party as it has just marked its 100th anniversary. But before we get into the discussion, let's just have a closer look at the celebrations so far. Making China great again. That, in essence, was the message predicted by China and its strongman leader Xi Jinping from the heart of the Chinese capital on Thursday. In a ceremony marked by pomp and patriotism, President Xi declared that the era of China being bullied is gone forever. He also said the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation has entered an irreversible historical course. Today, the Communist Party of China has become one of the world's most powerful political organizations, with over 95 million members. But its surge to superpower status has put it on a collision course with rivals like the United States, a development which President Xi alluded to when he declared that China would not accept sanctimonious preaching by others. The celebrations come as China puts the COVID-19 pandemic increasingly in the rearview mirror, but it faces mounting challenges both domestically and internationally. At home, it's facing a worsening demographic outlook that could put its long-term economic growth at risk. And abroad, it's facing criticism over its actions in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. So it was really a grand celebration that's befitting of a country that's set to become the world's largest economy very soon. But at the same time, we have heard Chinese President Xi Jinping say that he wants to create for China a more lovable, credible, respectable image. Is this a sign of anxiety that China may be ruffling feathers in the international community? Professor Liu?
I think this remark really took place in the right time because the whole world are really mesmerized in the sort of anxiety. There's been shifting of blames due to the pandemic and also in the lingering impact of financial crisis, and also the power shift that is taking place around the globe when China is definitely are there to rise both economically and militarily, technologically, etc., etc. So how the world can really move or converge into a new type of comfort zone with the rising China, and that's a central point.
We have seen a rise in wolf warrior diplomats, putting out a more aggressive, assertive style and stance when it comes to defending China. So is this a change in direction that we're talking about here?
Well, I'm not sure I would call it a change in direction, but certainly this is a new phase of Chinese diplomacy. And there's a couple of reasons for this. I'd just like to step back and look at the century view, because this, of course, we just saw the 100th anniversary of the CPC. 100 years ago, no one could have imagined that China would have the largest economy in the world today in purchasing power parity terms. So the biggest economy in the world run by communists. Even 40 years ago, at the beginning of economic reform and opening, this would have been, I think, largely unimaginable. So this is a very marked change. And if we think about this term discourse power, or 话语权 in Chinese, that having a commensurate right to be heard, to speak and to be heard really goes along with that. And in my view, I think this emergence of a more assertive foreign policy tone as well as content is actually quite necessary.
Perhaps at this point, we would like to bring in a different viewpoint from Professor Chen Gang from the National University of Singapore. Let's just have a listen.
To some extent, I think the top leadership has realized that too harsh or hardline positions from China, especially from those diplomats, sometimes may backfire and does not serve the long-term goal of achieving its strategic targets internationally. Especially, I think, during this time of pandemic, a lot of countries actually relatively I think they want to embrace a more friendly and lovable China rather than a hostile China.
So perhaps some recognition in Professor Chen's view that things may have backfired. What would your response be to that?
From the Chinese perspective, there is a very strong emotion from China to resent the Western type of imposition of their ideas, of their values, and institutional setting on China. And on the other, we do notice there is quite a backfire. But those backfire, again, are they really landing on the right type of facts and ground? And also that where the global community are really diverging in that, because for example, along the Belt and Road, from the contact that I have been doing the training program for foreign government officials, for international students, etc., most of them really love China. China does not have to be lovable, but they really love China.
I agree with what Professor Chen Gang said, but I would not use the word backfire. I would say that this more assertive, aggressive tone and stance is necessary, but not sufficient. So if China were only to rely on this, its outreach, its quest for discourse power would not be effective. But that doesn't mean that this more aggressive stance should be abandoned. It should be employed when necessary in conjunction with being more lovable is the first point. The second point, I think, is we need to be careful not to fall victim in this trap of Western media hegemony. So where we say the world does not like China being aggressive. Well, the world is far more than the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, and maybe New Zealand, right?
At this point, we may have to leave the discussion here, but it does segue into our next topic, where we talk about whether Chinese socialism is a credible rival to liberal democracy. To be continued on CNA Correspondent. Thanks for staying with us. China has just marked the 100th anniversary of its Communist Party. And this comes just 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc in Eastern Europe. So what's behind the longevity of the party? It was late in 2019 that news of a mysterious pneumonia infecting people in central China's Wuhan city emerged. That was still weeks before it was identified as the COVID-19 virus, which has since caused a pandemic that's still raging across the world. For the Communist Party of China, the incident has brought both criticism and praise at home and abroad, and discussion about its political system. In the early stages of the outbreak, Chinese officials were accused of a cover-up and mishandling the situation. The death of a local whistleblower doctor causing rare public outrage and calls for greater freedom of speech. But as the pandemic came under control, China sought to change the narrative, portraying its response as an undisputed victory led by the Communist Party and President Xi Jinping, especially as the United States and other democracies struggled to contain the outbreaks. Today, with life in China largely back to normal, the country has stepped up domestic production of its COVID-19 vaccines for the world, and in doing so, to position itself as a global leader. So, we have recently heard US President Joe Biden say that liberal democracies are in a race to compete with autocratic countries and governments. In your opinion, does China see this as competition as well?
Well, it is a sort of competition, but are we really competing from the same starting point? For China, after thousands of years of search, we finally broke the cycle of dynasty versus dynasty, etc. And then the Communist Party rose. But it managed today. The facts speak louder that 1.4 billion people are relatively happy, and also they see that tomorrow's life is better, so they have hope. And that's something that's highly credible from the Chinese perspective, and also from anyone that with the right type of mind to really to see and hooray the Chinese achievement. But is it going to fit for the US? No. Is it going to fit Norway? No. So it's a different type of road.
But having said that, Andy, given that the US is taking this stance that it is a competition, will China have to compete? It has used this opportunity to say that its political system is superior. So how do you view that?
Well, I think that's exactly right, Olivia, that it's only a competition because the U.S. sees it as a competition. The U.S. is founded on this idea that its system is not only one of a possible number of choices, but it is that the best choice and the only moral choice. And this is incredibly dangerous for the world. And I think this is why we are in this US-China competition, that China just wants to make a better life for its people and has succeeded really beyond in a miraculous way. And the US sees this and is threatened by it.
The question is this threat, this China threat, this phrase keeps coming up. So is Chinese socialism a threat to liberal democracy?
It is not a threat to liberal democracy. We think of this as a system, but it is a threat to the American understanding of liberal democracy, which means that this is the only form that works best. So this is an existential threat to this American notion, and how the U.S. responds remains to be seen. And this is, I think, why the world is in such a dangerous juncture right now.
Where does that leave the other countries? And before we get into that discussion, let's have a listen to Dan Wang, who is chief economist at Hang Seng Bank.
Previously, China didn't really have a strong voice for international affairs. Now, the attitude is that China wants to be more of a leading role in issues like climate change, poverty reduction, economic growth. So it has to become more active in other global issues as well.
So is there political will for China to do more?
Sure. For China, actually, China has the ambition to to have its people to live a better life. On the other side, China also wanted to see more of a peace and prosperity in the world. And so that's really the intention. But in terms of the communication, China does really want to improve. And also the fact that President Xi says that China really wanted to create a lovable and respectable image means that he has already noticed some of the deficiencies in the external communication we have. But one thing that China will not change is its own resolve to follow its own cultural belief and also political construct right now, because so far it is successful.
Andy, though, as China rises, like what Professor Liu was talking about, there will no doubt that expectations from the international community will increase, like what Dan was saying as well. So how would you respond to that?
No, I absolutely agree with what she said. I mean, that I think first there is the political will in China, and not just the political will, but the ability to actually execute. China has shown that not only does its system work for China, but because the world is so interconnected, and there are these daunting challenges like pandemics, like climate change, like cybersecurity, that there needs to be a new approach. And I think for those reasons, we will see, and we are seeing, China take an increasingly central and decisive role globally, as Don said.
At the same time, we do know that it's not just the international community, but there are also challenges on the domestic front. And we will continue with that discussion on CNA Correspondent. You're watching CNA Correspondent. As China's Communist Party marked its centenary this year, it's also having to deal with a new, younger generation of Chinese, as well as rising aspirations and expectations from a growing middle class. In a country of 1.4 billion people, social stability is of prime importance for the Communist Party of China. Chinese media have been keen to highlight that popular satisfaction with the leadership has grown stronger over the past 20 years. A survey by the University of California's China Data Lab showed that 70% of Chinese respondents preferred to live under China's political system compared to others a year ago. That's 83% now, and a long-term study by Harvard University showed that satisfaction with the Chinese government has increased from 86% in 2003 to 93% in 2016. So China is facing numerous domestic challenges. We're talking about an aging population, as well as its economic challenges as well. So in your opinion, is there anything that could unravel this stability that the Communist Party cherishes so much? Andy?
Certainly there are a lot of challenges, Olivia. But overall, I think what we've seen from the 2008 financial crisis to the COVID pandemic last year, and even going back to the beginning of the Communist Party, is the resilience and the adaptiveness of the party to changes. So I think the short answer is, of course, one should never be overconfident, but it seems that given the track record of the party, it is well equipped to deal with any challenges.
Now, the challenges can be that, of course, to continuously to keep these 1.4 billion people fed with better food and better nourishment, with food security is one thing. And the other, of course, is the higher living standards through better medical care, better educational, the resources that can be allocated. But the key now lies still in the imbalances, because we do see that the per capita income between coastal area versus the hinterland area is still very large.
And these are challenges as China continues to develop. And we do know that theory has it that as a country modernizes, it would liberalize, democratize. At the same time, here we are seeing the party mark its centenary. Before we get into this, let's have a listen to Professor He Baogang, who is from Deakin University in Australia.
In the East Asian context, if we see this Japan, South Korea, and when they have achieved economic development, slowly they move into the liberal democracy. But China so far failed to do so. But I believe in the end of the day, China has to deal with this tough issue because there's so many domestic problems. Currently, China through the kind of tough control. So for the time being, it's all right. But in the end of the day, they needed to deal with secession politics, corruption problems, democratic demanding, and those issues they can postpone, but they cannot just deny forever.
Andy, Professor He raised quite a few issues there. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the underlying idea behind what he said is what I would think of as a flat earth hypothesis, meaning that this has clearly been proven to be wrong, that as countries develop, they move towards liberal democracy. And of course, South Korea did, other countries did. And yet, again, here we have China that lifted 1.4 billion people out of poverty. The most successful SEZ increased its GDP 10,000 times in a country run by communists. So this is like demonstrating China has sailed around the world to show the world is round. And yet we still do have people who will probably go to their graves saying the world is flat. And hopefully they'll come to their senses, but some of them won't, and we have to accept that.
In somewhat, I concur with Professor He because there are some universals we can really share in terms of the human values. So, when people have a larger property and they do demand the rule of law to protect their property instead of, voting for collectivizing the property. The other is that, when people have the hope to live a better life, they really want a system that is there to give them the right of certainty that tomorrow is going to be better for them. Now, 90 million people are there, in the Communist Party circle. It shows that there's been quite a sort of a legitimacy in terms of popular support.
Well, I would agree with Bao Cheng that certainly today's China faces enormous challenges. And one I want to point out is just the younger generation think very, very differently. And this is a challenge. We can look at China's aging population, the declining birth rates, now well below the 2.1 replacement rate. But the question, though, is can the party deal with this effectively without quote-unquote liberal democracy? And my own view on this, why I call it this flat earth view of the world, is that the only way to solve these problems is through liberal democracy. And I see it as a kind of a fetish, that an unhealthy obsession, that voting at the ballot box is the way to do it. And I think the Communist Party is enormously responsive to societal demands and needs, and that there are other ways to do this. And that was my only point with that.
Well, we will have to leave the discussion there for now. Thank you so much for joining me on this show today, and I'm sure we'll be having many more discussions as we watch with keen interest China's development in the years to come. Till then, I'm Olivia Siong. Thanks for watching CNA Correspondent.